Government scheme providing hot meals to primary school children is being praised for tackling food poverty. However, serious concerns are now being raised about how it's being run. An Oireachtas Committee has heard that the programme may not be sustainable, with principals warning of heavy administrative burdens, food quality issues and rising waste. We are going to hear now from the Meelick Fianna Fáil TD Cathal Crowe, Chair of the Oireachtas Committee on Education and Youth, who has been speaking about this with Clare FM's Sean Lyons.
I think there's a general consensus that this is a good scheme. The principles behind it, the logic, having a hot school meals programme is all good. And I think most schools, most parents, most pupils want this to work, and the government's very committed to that too. What we're finding is now that it's a few years up and running, it's obvious what's working, what isn't. So I have views of this as a teacher, as a parent, but also as a politician. And as chairman of the Oireachtas Education Committee, we get to choose what bodies of work, we do at different times of the year. I asked colleagues if we could look at this. So we're looking at this across a 6-week period. We're having, at this week's meeting, we're having management bodies from various schools. So, your traditional Catholic patronage schools, Educate Together schools. We also have dietitians, chefs. Doreen Allen, who was instrumental in devising the scheme, is going to be giving testimony in a couple of weeks' time. We've even reached out to Marcus Rashford, who is the famous footballer in England, who helped to transform school meals. Look, I think what's really clear here is that the concerns we're hearing are that quality of food isn't always consistent. The packaging and the waste disposal is a major headache for schools and for parents. And then in counties like Clare, procurement can be an issue, because I would have seen this in the more remote parts of the county. The way the scheme is devised makes an awful lot of sense, but it doesn't work in a practical way when you're in a remote area and you might be able to procure a meal provider in your locality. You could be 10, 50 miles away from a delicatessen or something that can actually provide this service. So things like that need to change, and then I think we'll have a more refined and a more workable scheme.
And indeed, we were speaking to Councillor Tony Mulcahy recently, who runs a business which provides hot school meals to schools around this region and as far out as rural parts of Connemara. And one of his main criticisms of the scheme, particularly since the regulations were changed, is that it is difficult for schools in those rural areas, the likes of places in Connemara, as when waste has to be collected daily, it just doesn't work for them, because their bin collection might take place once a week, or indeed they mightn't have the facilities to heat meals on site. Would you acknowledge that it's particularly challenging and that the scheme isn't currently working for those schools?
I would absolutely acknowledge that, and we have several examples in County Clare as well. And as I said, the delicatessen or the local meal provider could be quite a distance away. Getting a hot school meal back there, it can be a challenge. The waste that's involved as well. For a few schools, I've had to personally, as a constituency TD, away from my role in the Oireachtas Education Committee, as a constituency TD, I've gotten onto the department for a few schools in the county asking for an easing of the procurement rules. They've done that in a very limited number of cases, but this would be to allow for maybe, sandwiches to be brought back to school as opposed to hot school meals. So there has been certain easings, but that's not going to continue overall. They're kind of stopgap measures. We're going to make recommendations as a committee. It's a cross-party committee. There's great collegiality in it. But we're going to make recommendations along the lines that future school buildings would have an in-school kitchen, that, you'd have someone, just the schools have hired in SNAs and caretakers, that maybe someone in the community could be brought in for an hour and a half each day, that they would cook or prepare or heat up meals and deliver them. That for some schools, that's probably a couple of years away. The schools in the county, I'm sure, rolling their eyes at the moment as they say we can't even get a sandwich. So in the first instance, the priority of our committee is to ensure that there's blanket coverage of the scheme, that the procurement rules are redrawn and made more applicable to rural schools, remote schools, that the quality of the food is standardised. And I must say, one school that reached out to actually praised Councillor Tony Mulcahy's company. So it is important to say we're getting better. We're also having parents in other parts of the county saying, we're not overly happy with the meals, but we are getting lovely feedback as well. And I think it's important to say that food waste is another major thing. And the other thing that I've been saying as someone who farms is that I think what's in the meals, I think we should be looking at. For example, if there's cheese going into the meals, it should be Irish produced cheese. Why not have milk central to it all? If there's meats involved, it should be Irish meats. I think we need to impose as a government certain thresholds so that if there's ingredients or constituent parts of the meal that a certain amount of it maybe should be organic, a certain amount of it should be, BS certified. I think we need to raise the bar here a little bit and ensure that the food they're getting is tasty, delicious, but nutritious overall.
Mm-hmm. So the issues are being looked at, and when it comes to issues like procurement, those issues that prevent people from being able to avail of the scheme full stop, how quickly could they be remedied, and could we be in a position next September where those schools who have lost out on the scheme this year because of the changes of regulations could actually be able to avail of it once again?
So I think the grant that funds this scheme needs to be increased for particularly remote schools. A school in the heart of Ennis or Shannon can quite easily procure a supplier and it can be dropped off very easily at the school gate. Quite more challenging when you're back in Carrigaholt or in the extremities of the western north of our county. There might be a local delicatessen in the shop, but we need to make, I think, the grant viable that they can actually get a batch of food heated, and brought back to the school, and the current procurement rules don't allow for that. As I said, I've had to go in and individually intervene for certain schools, but that's not sustainable either politically or from a policy point of view, that we have to step in and try to fix individual cases. I think what's needed here is an overall fix to the policy. It is good. I've yet to hear anyone saying dismantle it and pull this scheme entirely. I think everyone wants it to work. It's up and running now a few years, but it's very obvious what isn't working. And I would imagine when we get to drafting our report and submitting it to government at all, I would envisage it being quite a short report, 6 or 7 pages. There's probably only be 5 or 6 recommendations here around procurement, quality of food waste, and we're getting very clear feedback. I've also called out a few schools, NSCBS being one of them, where I met with the student council there, and they gave very clear, concise views on what's working, what isn't working. So all of that is going to feed directly into our policy document, and hopefully we'll see governments adopt that change, because government don't want waste. Government do want value for money. They want the scheme to be in rural and urban areas. They want procurement fixed. So I would hope all of our recommendations will be taken on board, and that a lot of this could happen by September 2026.
That was the Meelick Fianna Fáil TD and Chair of the Oireachtas Committee on Education and Youth, Cathal Crowe, speaking with Sean Lyons. For more on this, I'm joined by the Assistant Principal of CBS Primary School in Ennis, Colm Davoren, and Gareth Heagney, the Principal of Sixmilebridge National School. And thanks to both of you for being with us on this issue. And Colm, the Hot School Meals programme, widely welcomed in principle. Can you give us your experience of how it's actually working in schools such as your own?
Yeah, I would agree entirely with a lot of what Cathal has said there, because we'd have to welcome such an initiative. Anytime children are getting invested in, it's a good day. So I'd say that first and foremost. In terms of the practicalities, though, and he alluded to this himself, there are issues with the implementation. And I suppose the primary concern that I would have about this implementation is the level of food waste involved. The level of food waste could be upwards of a sixth of our population. We have over 600 children in the school, and it would appear that over a sixth of them are not consuming those meals on a daily basis.
And Colm, have you gotten to the bottom of why that is? Is it just they suddenly realise when it comes time to eat their hot meal, they're not quite as hungry as they thought they were? Can it be maybe there was a mix-up and it wasn't what they had ordered?
There's multiple factors involved. I think in terms of how it's administered via the company we work with, it's administered very well. I think there can be issues around, let's say, menu tiredness, which I know came up with the committee yesterday. And there can also be issues around just them enjoying the food. So we have a lot of parents who are now sending a lunch in with them. And when you have a situation where you have school meals being provided and a lunch being sent in as well, it points to the fact that the system is probably not working in the way that it should. So the amount of waste that we would see from a packaging perspective and from a food perspective is the real concerning issue here. And that comes down to, I suppose, the manner in which the scheme itself is administered from a departmental point of view. let's say, when we look at it, we see a level of waste that is definitely it's deeply concerning, and that is something that we would like to be looked at. How can we look at reducing that level of waste in a world that we're living in today, where you have an awful lot of children who are going hungry? The idea of food being thrown out on a daily basis is not something that we like to see. And I would again echo what Conal Crowe said. It is an excellent idea to support children and to reduce food poverty, but in the manner in which you do so is something that really needs to be looked at, because if not, what we're going to is we're closing our eyes to something that's happening right in front of us. And I mean, the other point I would make is on the manner in which this is done is that the grant you get for this is on an entirely separate account. So in our case, that would be the same amount as our entire capitation to run the rest of the school in total. But there's no encouragement for you to do that well, because if you find a way to administer the program better, you don't benefit from that. There's no reward to it, and a system that's developed like that doesn't encourage schools to find ways to administer this better,
to improve it.
Yes, because it's administered from a global perspective, and that doesn't always necessarily lead to the gains.
So some sort of incentive scheme is needed. And let's bring Gareth Heagney in. And just as Colm was speaking there, Gareth, I wonder, are parents like myself part of the problem that children get the hot school meals, but we still send in something for them for snack time? But maybe I'm guilty of putting too much in the lunchbox for snack time, and they're over full by the time it comes to eating the hot meal. I'll have to reduce what I'm putting in the lunch boxes. Do you agree with Colm, though, that ultimately it is a beneficial scheme, but the current model isn't sustainable for the number of reasons Colm outlined, including that rather interesting latter one there, that there's no incentive for schools to try and improve how this has been operated?
Good morning, Alan and Colm, and to your listeners. I would be inclined to agree with what Colm has said there, and that would be, what he's recounted would be similar to the experiences we have in our own school here in Sixmilebridge. And indeed, a lot of what Cathal Crowe said as well makes sense and would reflect our own experiences. Like to your first question about parents sending in additional food, I think that in itself says a lot, that if children and parents seek to send in or bring in additional food from home on top of the hot meals that they're getting in school, I think that's an indication that things aren't all well with the scheme. I would agree with Colm completely that no one disputes the good intentions behind the scheme, and virtually every school has a certain proportion of pupils who absolutely depend on the scheme for a hot meal every day. But really, there are a number of problems that are making the scheme in its current form completely unsustainable. And I suppose in that way, Alan, to say that the problem really is structural and resourcing one. For example, the allocated maximum allowance that the government is giving per meal is €3.20. That's just too low, and it is limiting what suppliers can offer into schools.
And does that go back, Gareth, to the point that Cathal was making earlier on about food quality? It should be tasty and nutritious. It strikes me that it's probably hard to provide tasty, nutritious food for that little amount of money, and it also, the sameness sometimes of the menu can be off-putting, but I guess when that's what the little amount of money you have to deal with, it's hard to provide much variety.
I think, in fairness to the suppliers, Alan, that's a big problem, because they have to consider the costs in terms of producing the food. They have to consider the cost in terms of distribution, because most schools are getting the food delivered hot to the schools, or delivered to the school where they're reheated within the building. And then in most cases, there's the extra personnel that would be required then to deliver the food to the classrooms and that type of thing. But I think there is a problem in that most schools can't access an alternative cold option if that's what children or families would prefer. Colm has spoken to the waste, which is a problem in our school as well. But I think that for me, and I think for a lot of principals, one of the problems that emerged as a key problem back in August 25 was when the Department of Social Protection introduced new procurement rules. It put a huge burden on boards of management and ultimately principals in undertaking that procurement process. And it just created, I think, a degree of resentment, because, as Colm mentioned, the money that's invested in hot meals is a multiple of the money that each school is given to run its day-to-day affairs. So, the money we get from the Department of Social Protection to run the hot meal scheme in our school, where more and more children are opting out now, is a massive amount more than what we get to pay for insurance, light and heat, cleaning services, that we can use to pay for teaching and learning resources.
And is there a level of resentment then among schools that are looking at that going, well, if you're able to come up with all this money for this programme, what about all these other essential elements we need to keep the school running and functioning normally?
I think so. I think that government isn't aware of or is blind to the context in which the hot school meal scheme is operating in schools. So, there's an ongoing pressure, particularly on principals, in trying to manage the finances of a school, while at the same time seeing huge volumes of money coming into the school's bank account strictly for hot meals, and it can only be used for that purpose. There's no provision given to schools to allow for or to use the remaining balance at the end of the year for general school expenditure.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds. I can understand why that would irk schools. And Colm, just to bring you back in, I mean, that must be frustrating when you see all that money and you think, God, what I could do with that in terms of paying for lighting in the school and so on. But there's also the administrative and procurement burden placed on management. Is it creating a lot of extra work for principals and senior staff, or am I overstating it somewhat?
I wouldn't say you're overstating it at all. And I think Gareth puts it very well there, in that the level of, let's say, bureaucratic effort that's required from in-school management is much higher than what it should be. And as he correctly points out, you can only use the grant for that particular purpose. And it does create a level of resentment, because the cost of running schools have gone up and gone up and gone up steadily. But, the capitation has stayed relatively similar. And we now have a situation where you have a tranche of money here where you can see the waste in it, where you may be able to actually use that money to a more effective way, and your hands are tied for that. So I suppose this is the whole idea of the committee looking at it, and it's great to see that Cathal Crowe is chair of that committee as a teacher himself. He understands the background of it. And you would hope that these are issues that are looked at and are not just given lip service to, because it's very easy to give lip service. It's very easy to give a sound bite to that, something like that, and move along. But this needs more than just lip service. It needs the system itself, as it's currently laid out, is not effective. It doesn't work the way it doesn't work to the optimum level. And in this day and age, I believe that if the quality of minds that we have at our disposal put their minds to it, you could do this better than how it is at the minute. And we should always strive to be improving at everything we do, but most importantly when it comes to children.
Yeah, and Gareth, issues from the three of you, Cathal earlier as well, have raised food quality, menu fatigue. What about suitability for children with allergies or special dietary needs? Are those factors taken into consideration when providing these hot meals, or is there not enough of that kind of granular level, exactly the specific requirements of each student? It's just, here are the 4 or 5 hot options, or however many options there are, and just pick what you want on any given day, and that's kind of it. Doesn't matter whether you have allergies or special dietary needs.
I have to say, from our own experience with our supplier, we have a good working relationship with them, and where individual requirements arise, they're very accommodating, very responsive, and I think that comes down to ongoing clear communication between the school, the supplier, and the parents of the children involved. But Alan, just to say that in relation to the Oireachtas Committee and I suppose what it finds or what it recommends, I'd be hoping that they will see sense in recommending to government that there's an increased rate per meal. That will give a greater level of flexibility and room for manoeuvre to suppliers to increase the menu of options for children, to increase the quality of the food delivered into schools. But I also think that there are 2 other very important pieces that it should consider. One would be that government should provide a centralised procurement framework for schools, where schools can just go to the list of suppliers that government has identified and thereby circumvent or avoid the need to do all the paperwork around their procurement every couple of years. And I think built into that would need to be special measure to allow schools to go to a local supplier, to retain that discretion for schools to go to a local deli or a local restaurant as well. So I think those two pieces would be important in the procurement. And finally then, I think that, and Cathal Crowe spoke to this earlier, there is something needed to support the individual and complex circumstances that small schools and rural schools face, because it's not viable for lots of suppliers to go to rural areas or to go to small schools. So that would need to be built into the system to ensure that no child in any school, including small schools or rural schools, are disadvantaged.
Okay, lots of people getting in touch on this, and we'd love to hear from parents out there, indeed teachers, school staff, on how well or otherwise they feel the Hot School Meals programme is working. Listener here says on 086 1800 964, the school meals are really poor, complete waste of money and waste of food, badly administered by the department. And another listener muses, what will the children be eating when the South American beef comes in? Well, we can't quite say when. I think if, because the vote on the Mercosur deal has to happen at the European Parliament further down the road. MEPs have to vote on it at this moment in time. Looks more than likely it will pass, but it is not a fait accompli. Colm, you mentioned food wastage earlier on, which is a big issue. Packaging as well. I mean, how significant is this problem at school level? Is the food that isn't eaten, is that just thrown out? Is there any way in which it could be given to the less fortunate, those who would very much welcome whatever food isn't eaten? And are schools being left to absorb the environmental and financial costs of waste management?
Yes, so that's kind of a multifaceted problem. So that was something in our own situation that we tried to do, to try and give any of the food that wasn't consumed to the less fortunate. But that had to be stopped from a health and safety perspective, apparently.
Which is understandable. I'm sorry to cut across you, but isn't that it's understandable? But it's such a pity, isn't it, that to see all that food literally going to waste when there be others who gratefully receive it.
And I think in most schools, generally, what's happening is that the child brings home the packaging with them. But again, you're just moving around the pieces on a chessboard there, because as you know yourself as a parent, you end up being the one who has to deal with that packaging then. And between there's a packaging waste issue and there's a food waste issue. But I would know in my own case, and in many cases in our own school, in the evening you'll see these packages in the bin. So to one degree or another, all schools have to deal with the packaging and the food waste elements as well. They have to consider that. And again, that's a real element of what we're dealing with on a day-to-day practical level. That is definitely an element of it. But again, I would echo what Cathal has said as well about the content of those. If we look at, I do like the idea. I think it's a very important idea to look at having locally sourced food, locally sourced cheese, locally sourced meats in those, if at all possible, especially against the backdrop of what's happening, let's say, via Mercosur and then the wider world and food production in general. I think that's a very important point to be made. But coming back to the waste and the packaging element of it, it is a clear and present issue. Our waste costs will have gone up from the amount of packaging that does end up in the bin. Because let's say if a child isn't at school, for example, and they haven't opted out of their meal, in that situation, another child might have that packaging might go into the bin, and you have to deal with everything that comes with that. So, as I say, on a practical level, it does need to be assessed. It needs to be looked at, and as Gareth said, the recommendations that come out of this in the Oireachtas Committee will be vital. That those recommendations are practical, and that they have an impact to improve what is a very, very laudable idea, but to improve its implementation.
Yeah, just to finish with you on this, Gareth, and I think the word there used by Colm is quite a great way to describe it. A laudable scheme, but has its flaws. And with the government looking beyond primary to post-primary as well, and committing to providing free hot meals to all primary and secondary school going children by 2030, quite a number of changes I'm sure you feel need to happen now to make that goal realistic. How optimistic are you that the kinks can be ironed out of the scheme and that it will run quite efficiently and smoothly by the turn of the decade?
Oh, look, I think we have to remain optimistic, Alan. The scheme is relatively new in lots of schools, and I think we have taken a lot of learnings from the last couple of years. I think in fairness to Crowe and his colleagues on the Oireachtas Committee, they see some of the flaws in the system. And I hear on the grounds that politically there is a desire within the relevant parties in the Oireachtas to make the changes necessary, because everyone acknowledges that the investment in the hot meal scheme nationwide is a huge volume of money. It's a massive volume of money, and the state needs to ensure that we get good value for the money that's invested. So I'd be optimistic, and I hope that the suggestions that Colm and I and others have made, indeed those that have represented their groups and their interests at the Oireachtas Committee, that all those thoughts, suggestions will be put into the melting pot, and in the near future that the scheme can be improved in schools, primary schools, and then that those learnings can be put into place when it's rolled out to post-primary schools as well.
Okay, look, really, really interesting chat, and great to get both of your perspectives on it, given you are at the coalface on this. My thanks to Gareth Heagney there, Principal of Sixmilebridge National School, and the Assistant Principal of CBS Primary School here in Ennis, Colm Davoren.